Hey there, my name is Adam, and today we're going to be doing a review on a software called ProcessStreet. We're going to take a look and really give you an idea, an overview of what ProcessStreet really is, who it's truly a great use case for, and then also go into a live demo, both on the back end build and configuration side of the software, and then also on the front end user interface to give you a better idea of how it works. From there, we're going to go and give you a couple of pro tips to get started that we've picked up through working with our clients, building, implementing, and configuring ProcessStreet at their company. And then also we'll give you a couple final thoughts so that hopefully you can make an educated decision on if ProcessStreet is right for you. So if that sounds good, let's get started. Let's get into what ProcessStreet really is. ProcessStreet is a cloud-based business process management software. In its most basic sense, ProcessStreet allows you to take your workflows, the workflows of your business, build them into the cloud, and then deploy them to the rest of your team, helping them run much more efficiently. So some of the byproducts of ProcessStreet and using the software are control, visibility, and efficiency. Control in the way that you can really define and build the exact steps into ProcessStreet for your team to complete, and they'll follow along with the directions that you provide. And also, within each one of those steps, you can also build in resources and training to help guide those team members through. So there is a training component that comes with ProcessStreet that is a nice add-on as well, as a byproduct of how you can build out these steps with many different type of fields, videos, links, and things to help your team members get through processes. Visibility in the way that your team now no longer has to guess what to do and when to do it. The inbox feature of ProcessStreet enables your team to just come into ProcessStreet and see what's on their plate for that day, along with due dates as well, to make sure that they're always staying on top of what is most critical at that time. And then efficiency from that standpoint, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of, as I said, what to do and when to do it, and you spend much more time executing. Not to mention the amount of headaches that this process software cuts out has really been a big value add for our clients as well. Before we go any further, I want to take a quick pause to talk about the difference between process management and project management. When we talk process management, which, as mentioned, is what ProcessStreet is really built for, think about processes that have a very clearly defined start, middle, and end. So there's a trigger that starts the process, there's clearly defined steps in the middle, and then there's a definition of done endpoint to that process. It's very measurable, and there's not a lot of gray area in the middle. Versus if you talk project management, you think of more of, I would define project management as a general guidance of resources toward a common goal. So it's more guided by a general framework and milestones, and oftentimes requires a project manager. So a good example of this would be managing some sort of a campaign or initiative within your company. That is probably best for project management software, not ProcessStreet. And I'm sure you recognize a number of these logos from YouTube pre-roll because they are quite active out there, and they are great softwares, but there is a clear difference between process management software and project management software. So just wanted to clear that up before we went any further, but let's keep going here. So now let's talk about who ProcessStreet is really a great fit for, and we wanted to draw you a picture of a profile company that would hopefully resonate with many of you watching. So smaller companies with 1 to 25 employees are a great fit for ProcessStreet from what we've found in working with our clients. I do want to say that it can scale past 25, but you do have to have a very strong implementation team in place to make that happen. So these companies are companies that are experiencing some of these pain points, like things that are falling through the proverbial cracks. People are not following processes, whether you have some Microsoft Word docs that nobody's even looking at or following. That's a classic problem there. Poor communication as it comes to working through these processes as well. And sometimes another issue that people are facing are bottlenecks, where work needs to run through one individual and only that individual. Oftentimes that person can't take a vacation, or when they do, everything comes to a halt. That's another problem that Process Street solves for. So these companies are typically looking for a better way to coordinate and collaborate on work and move that more easily through their organization, scale operations. So taking what's out of one person's head, getting it down, documented, and then delegated to a team on a more scalable and repeatable basis. And they want to better define how and work is done within their company. So they really want to put standards in place when it comes to exactly the steps to take to complete a task within the company. And they also want visibility. So they need a better way to see and track the workflows that are currently outstanding in the company so that they can have a good understanding of people's capacity and get a really encapsulating snapshot of what's happening at that point in time. So some of the great use cases for Process Street are repeatable processes. And I'll go back to reference the project process management slide where we said processes that have a very clear defined beginning, middle, and end. Some just okay use cases for Process Street, I would say, are more of the Kanban style processes. And when you think of Kanban style processes, think of, yes, they have a start, but there's a lot of gray area in the middle. And then at some point in the future, it will be completed, but that date is still to be determined. So again, that would be something like trying to manage your entire sales pipeline within Process Street would be a good example of that. Now, Process Street can help you at each phase of your sales pipeline by telling your salesperson exactly what to do and the work to execute on to move it to the next phase. But if you think that Process Street is your solution for managing your entire sales pipeline through each phase, it probably isn't a best use case, especially as things can kind of sit from phase to phase at times. So would probably say that maybe something like Trello is a little better, or if you have a CRM, there's probably something to manage your sales pipeline in that. Now let's talk about how Process Street really works at its core. And at its core, there are really two facets of Process Street. The build and configuration side of Process Street, which I'm going to refer to as the back end, and then the front end, the user interface side of actually running checklists and workflows from a team member standpoint. So the first step in Process Street is that you have to build an actual workflow template, and then users go and take that template and run it as a live process. So on the build side, workflows must be built, and they do give you a template library to start out, but we really don't use that when it comes to our clients, as we find that it's fairly basic. And if you are serious about really getting customized with your processes, we don't see a whole lot of value there, but it can be good to see from an inspiration standpoint as you go start to use Process Street to really help you understand what's possible in building in Process Street. It's drag and drop, and I'll use the term no code, meaning there's no coding involved, and it makes it really easy to get started and just drag these fields into your workflow to quickly build it. It's also very flexible. So I'm going to talk about conditional logic, dynamic due dates, and task assignments when we flip over to show you on the live demo, but basically allows you to make the process ebb and flow based on the inputs that you put in. So it makes it quite flexible, but it can become fairly complicated, as I do say that in the same breath, especially if you have complex processes. So what's really critical there is that you have a technical resource who understands how to build and configure the back end so that the processes work the way that you intend them to on the front end. Finally, it's very API friendly. And what I mean by that is that it has many different integration opportunities. So within Process Street, you can, through their native integration, integrate and send documents for signature and DocuSign, send messages to Slack, push and pull data from Salesforce, as well as Jira and Google Drive. It does play really well with Zapier. And if you're not familiar with Zapier, Zapier is a software that allows two softwares who typically wouldn't integrate or connect to integrate and connect. So there's plenty of content on YouTube around Zapier, so I'd encourage you to go look up Zapier, but Process Street does play really well with Zapier. So if you do have Zapier or you're thinking about needing an integration there, there's a high chance that you can make it happen with the Zapier integration. From a user interface side, there's really three main components on the front end. You have your library, where you go and select a workflow to run. You have your inbox, where you see all tasks that are and when they're due on your plate. And then you have reports, which are where you can save custom views of active workflows so you can keep an eye on things from a macro level as well. So with that being said, we're now going to go flip over to the live demo where we'll walk you through the back end and the front end of Process Street and add just a little bit more color to what we've kind of been going through. So here we are now in Process Street, where we're going to take a look at the backend build interface of the software. To get started, you're going to first need to create a workflow template, which you can do so by clicking here and then new workflow. Today, I'm not going to start from scratch. I am going to go in and continue editing a workflow template that I need to add another task to for a refund request. So to get into edit mode, what you're going to want to do is click on edit here. And the first thing you're going to notice is the task list on the left. This is the chronological list of all tasks that you've currently built within your process. On the right side, you can see the drag and drop interface start to come into play. And there's really two types of fields that you have here. Forms, which are where you input data, and content, which are things like links, videos, images, GIFs, things of that nature that are more readable content. So to get started here, typically our first step in a process is always to bring in your inputs. And I'm just going to run down here and give you a quick overview of the inputs we used on this task. We use short text, short text, short text, an email input, which takes and validates that an email address was put into the workflow. A drop down here, long text, another short text, a date selector, which gives you, when selected, a calendar date and time that you can select from this input. And then finally, a members field here, which is where you can select a member from your organization from a drop down. And in our next task, I'm going to get into how that really shines through from a member standpoint. So the next task in our process is for a manager to approve the submitted form that was in task 1. With that being said, through the use of the members dropdown, we have dynamically assigned the selected member to be the person to approve this task as the person that is going to say it's approved or decline it. And if it's declined, Process Street does give that individual an opportunity to add some notes to the person that submitted the task as well. So that's a good example of how you can use a members dropdown to dynamically assign individuals to a step in Process Street. Also, what I want to point out here is if you see this little hand here on the left here, that is what's called a stop task indication. And stop tasks are what enforce the completion of tasks in a specific order in Process Street. So basically says you cannot complete this task before you complete this task. So it's saying you have to complete the input form and then submit it to the manager for review, and so on and so forth. So this person can't make billing changes until it's approved. So in our next step, we'll get into billing changes and touch on some of the other highlights of Process Street, including variables and the training aspect that comes through as well. So now that the manager has approved the information that was submitted in task 1, it's now on another individual to come in and make changes in the system. And this is where these variables come into play. And what variables do is that they show information from inputs in prior steps. So you'll see here that these brackets indicate company name. So what this does, if this was a live workflow run, it would flow in the actual input information that was in the company name field. And same for these other bolded variables as well. The other thing that it does here is brings in a training component in Process Street. So what that does is through the content fields, you can embed and link many different resources for your people to allow and help them to get through a process. So this is where that training component comes in. So to say, if it was someone's first day and they were assigned this in Process Street, they would be able to get through this process without having to ask too many questions if you do build in the appropriate resources and videos and things like that for your team. So that's really where Process Street starts to become a training tool as well as a functional workflow tool. Our next step here after the changes have been made in the system is to notify the client. And you'll see that we have two repetitive tasks here. One, to notify the client company fault, or notify the client fault. And these relate back to the input on our page 1 here, which we ask who is at fault. In this situation, this is where conditional logic comes into play. So if the client was at fault, we only want to show the client, and vice versa with the company. So I'm just going to quickly show you how conditional logic is added. So when you add conditional logic here, what you do is always, it's best practice to hide fields by default, which is where you indicate which fields you want to hide by default up here. So we have our step for the company and then the client fault, and then these micro tasks here are the steps and fields and content that live within the task itself. So by default, those are hidden, and then we add rules to show that content. So if who is at fault is the company, then show notify the client company fault, and then again notify the client fault if it was the client's fault. The reason we did that here is because we've created two separate different emails that are to be sent to the company contact depending on whose fault it was. So this is where we'll highlight this email send feature, which is a huge time saver in Process Street. So what the email send feature does is allow you to basically draft an email that is comprised of hard-coded text and then also variable text, and put it in your inbox. So all you have to do is press send. So here you'll indicate the email that you want to send it to. Again, you can hard code this data, or you can use a variable to pull that information in, which we did with the company contact in this form. And then we hard coded some data in the subject. So refund request, input their company name or flow in their company name, and then also the date of that refund request. And then again, down here, hey, first name of the company contact. We want to let you know your refund is coming in the amount of for your next bill on, and then insert the next invoice there, and then apologies for the error on our part. So what this really does is save you a ton of time and standardizes how maybe your customer service team is interacting with clients. Lets you standardize the voice that they'll use with clients as well. So all they have to do is just click the button to send, and Process Street does the rest of the work for them. So the last thing to do here is add my final task to this workflow. I want to have my finance group verify the billing changes on the client's last invoice. I also want to give them a link to the website where they actually go to verify those changes, and then have them sign off using a subtask, adding a little extra accountability. So to do so, I'm going to click down here on task, give it a name, and then bring that over and bring it in as a heading here. And then I'm going to bring in those variable fields as we've seen before to supply the most pertinent information to this employee. And then I am going to add that website link to make it super easy that they can just hit a URL and pop right out to verify those changes. And to do that, I'm just going to add a URL behind some text here. And we'll click OK there. So again, this is going along with the theme of putting all the most relevant, pertinent information in front of your people, along with the right resources so that they can see this task in their inbox in Process Street and quickly act on it instead of the guesswork and back and forth of what is it that I have to do and where do I need to get this information to do my job. So very actionable here. The next thing we're going to do is then bring in that subtask for some accountability. And I like to make these subtask statements in past tense as if someone is signing off on them. I'm also going to make this box required so they can't move past this task and complete the workflow without checking this box and completing it. And the next thing to do here is that we now need to assign owners. So what we're going to do is, I said I wanted the finance group at our company to verify these changes. So what I'm going to do here is come down here to assign, and then I'm going to search the group finance. So what's great about groups is that you can have multiple users assigned to a group. And so we're going to have our finance group, whomever first gets to it, verify these changes. And this needs to be done. And here's an example of these dynamic due dates in Process Street, 3 days after a specific date. But before we add that, I just want to point out the number of dates that you can trigger off of. So you can trigger off of when the workflow was actually run, the task in front of it, the next invoice date, which was actually a date input field, or a specific task completed prior in the workflow. So you can get very flexible, and I'm going to do 3 days after an input date, but you can do before as well. So you can really get pretty customized with what we have going on here. So 3 days after the next invoice, so that won't be due until after that invoice. And that is all that we needed to do here on this task. So the next thing to do is to publish this to my organization so that my team can start to run this workflow. So before we move past the build side of Process Street, I want to quickly touch on automations. And with automations, there are two types: native automations through Process Street and then automations through Zapier. Native automations are configured inside of Process Street, and it exists in this example. You'll see this icon, which is a Google Sheets icon, meaning that when this task is completed, it passes data to a Google spreadsheet that I've connected on the back end of this. In saying that, the other native integrations that are available are through Slack, Salesforce, Jira, as mentioned, Google Sheets, and then Process Street as well. So that Process Street integration is where you finish a workflow, and then it flows the information from the workflow you just completed into a new workflow. An example of the DocuSign integrations, where it would pass data from Process Street, pre-fill a document in DocuSign, and then send it to a client for signature. So those are some examples of native integrations you can set up without leaving Process Street. And the second type of automation is a Zapier automation, which is configured outside of Process Street. There, you would trigger an automation in Zapier to start when, per se, a task is completed in Process Street, and then that would kick off the chain of events that you could string up in Zapier. There's really endless possibilities when it comes to Zapier automation, so I'd encourage you to check out Zapier as well. Now let's go and take a look at the front-end user interface side of Process Street. Here we are on the front end of Process Street, and we're going to start by running a workflow. To do that, we're going to hop into the library up top here, and you'll see our folders of all of our workflow templates that we can choose from. I do want to note that the folders listed here can be configured for access permissions, so in case there are some things you don't want the rest of your team to see, you do have some options to restrict access. So now we're going to go in and find the workflow template that we want to run. And here's the refund request. What we're going to do now is click on Run Workflow. We're going to give this workflow a name. We always recommend that you implement some standard naming conventions at your company to keep your workflows easy to find, and typically you'll want to include some specific identifying information within the title to help your people distinguish between workflow runs. So we'll click Run Workflow. Now we'll begin to input required information. I'm going to expand this workflow for visibility by clicking Show More. It's only showing one task right now because we have this indicated as a stop task, but If you want to see the subsequent tasks in the workflow, click on Show More. I'll begin putting in the information here. The next piece we're going to select is the who's at fault. And if you'll remember from when we built this, with conditional logic, we have made this to show company. So that is how conditional logic works. So if you selected client, it would pop up client as well, but we'll go with company here. When I select next invoice date, this is going to show you how the dynamic due date assignment works. If you'll remember, we set verified billing changes to 3 days after their next due date. So let's say their next invoice is on the 3rd. And we'll click Save. So you see the 3rd plus 3 days puts us at the 6th. And now we'll see how the dynamic member assignment will assign a member that we select to this task here. So I'm going to say Brandon's in charge of that, and then you'll see that Brandon was assigned on this task as well. Before we leave here, one additional piece that I want to point out about the interface of Process Street, and I think one of the most underrated features of this program, is the comment box. And the comment box is where you can tag other teammates to notify them or ask questions of something that's pertaining to this task, or you could even just keep a note for yourself. So for instance, you could just mention, I'll say Brandon, click that, and that is how you make comments. So it really cuts out the back and forth of having to go out, send an email, that person then trying to decipher the email, whereas these comments, that person will get an email notification and they'll pop straight into the task at hand. So it really cuts out that back and forth when it comes to coordinating or having conversations around some of these outstanding tasks on your plate. So now to complete a task, we'll simply click on this complete task button here, which will then move the workflow to the next individual on your team. It will automatically notify them, so your team member does not have to do anything other than go to their inbox and open up their task to complete. You'll see up here this notification that the automation was complete. And if you'll remember from the build side, we have an automation set up that takes the information from this task and pushes it out to a Google Sheet through the Process Street native automation. So I'm going to click here, and you'll see that this information has flown through to this spreadsheet that we set up. So we know our automation's working, and we've just completed this task to push this through to our next teammate, and we'll continue down with this process. Now that Brandon has approved the refund request in step 2, we're going to jump over into the inbox to show you where you and your team will go to see all work on your plate. So we'll click on inbox up top here. And really what the inbox shows, as I mentioned, all the tasks on your plate, and it breaks it out into overdue tasks, tasks due today. It'll also list out tasks if there are no due dates associated here, and then also tasks upcoming as well. What you can do from the inbox is either launch the full workflow, or your team members can come in here and just click on the task itself, and it will give you an abbreviated task here so your teammates can just check the box there without having to hop in and out of workflows, and then complete the task as well by checking this box here, and it'll move it along to the next individual. So the last thing we'll touch on in the inbox here is that if you are set up with admin access, you can actually view others' inboxes. So you could have, if you do have groups set up, you could see what's sitting on the finance group itself. Or if you wanted to dial into an individual, you could click on an individual. So really this is great in case you need to cover if someone's out on short notice, or if you do need to pop in and see who's fallen behind on their tasks. Now we'll look at the final component of the front end of Process Street, which is reports. And reports are where you can save custom views of active workflows. So Process Street gives you a couple of defaults to start out at the top here, but you can add your own custom views by clicking this plus button right here. And when you do, you'll have the option to change who can see this, and you'll have a couple of options here. So this can be private to you. You can assign individuals or specific groups to only view this. And also you can configure this to be seen by all members across your organization so that everyone would have this report and view saved right here. So when you do go to save the actual report view itself, what you can do, you have a couple of options here to choose from. Status. You can choose what workflow that you want to be included in this. And then you can also choose any pieces of information or input fields from that workflow to show as columns here. And in this case, I've configured it to show the company name that was input, the amount of the refund, and also who's at fault. So you do have quite a few options when it comes to tailoring specific reports and views for yourself within Process Street to really give you that extra visibility that you need to know where everything's sitting in your company at one time. So now that we've taken a look at the user interface on the back and front end of Process Street, let's talk through some pro tips here that we've found to be helpful when it comes to implementing with our clients. So pro tip number one is always start with a process document. In its most simplest form, you need to lay out the steps in your process before you go to build in Process Street. That can be on a piece of paper, or it could be in a word processing software. That's fine as well. But document it and then run it through your team to say, hey, do you agree with this? If there's any changes preliminarily, you want to make those before you go configuring in Process Street. I promise it'll save you a ton of time. Process Street has actually just released a new feature called Pages, which functions as a shared document and internal wiki that you can use to collaborate with your team. So I would recommend doing your process documents in Pages to get started here. And as you document these processes, you're going to need two people wearing two hats. Number one, your process expert. They're your subject matter expert when it comes to processes at your company. They're the person that can tell you exactly step by step what needs to happen. Secondly, you're going to need your process documenter. That process documenter is the person who is going to sit there and take all the requirements and information from the subject matter expert, your process expert, and put it into a nice, concise document that reads well and almost tells a little bit more of a story. So you need your process expert and you need your process documenter, two critical roles here. Now, your process expert could also be the same as your process documenter. That's totally fine. But again, the idea of two hats here. Number two is keep it simple to start and create a 1.0 version and have your team use it for a month in Process Street before you go and start to add fancy automation, because your first build out in Process Street is never going to be perfect. I promise you that. There's a big difference between a process on paper and a process in actual reality as you go through and are forced to follow it in Process Street. There will be changes. So go 1.0, super simple to get started. And then once you've made these changes as needed, maybe a month in or so, now you can then bring in the fancier automations that do drive a lot of value. But it's more important to have a functioning process that's not automated than a highly automated, non-functional process. So as you build and configure in Process Street, the third hat I'm going to mention here is your process builder. They're the technical individual at your company that knows how and understands how to build and configure in that back end of Process Street. A very important person to have on your team, especially not even just on the front end build, but also on the back end maintenance. So make sure you identify that individual at your company and make sure that they have a strong understanding of how to build and configure Process Street for your team so that it functions as you intend it to. And finally, pro tip number 3, training and user support is critical. And this is where a fourth hat is going to come into play, and that's your Process Street lead. So while the functionality of Process Street is really simple, it does take some time to get used to, which is where a Process Street lead comes in. They are going to be the go-to person at your company to answer all questions Process Street that come in from your team. They're going to make sure that people are completing their Process Street training. They're making sure that people are completing testing of workflows as you roll them out, and also making sure that they're actually using the software on a daily basis, checking their inbox, and making sure that things are staying up to date. Super important to have a Process Street lead, because without, and if your users do not feel supported or have a resource or go-to person, adoption will fall by the wayside. So a Process Street lead is absolutely critical as the fourth hat in a process street implementation. So as we wind down our review, I want to leave you with a couple final thoughts that will be helpful in deciding if Process Street is right for your company. In saying that, it's a great first step for companies that want to get into process and automation. It enables you to get the processes that are in your head or have maybe been living on process documents up into the cloud so that they can be followed by all. It solves many of the business problems that occur at that smaller level when it comes to people following the process, bottlenecks, visibility, things of that nature. Process Street is able to solve for many of those business issues. I do want to say, though, that keep in mind, Process Street is not a set it and forget it solution. What I mean by that is, yes, you have to build it today, but it is going to take some ongoing maintenance. So be prepared to have someone on your team be that dedicated Process Street resource to where they can support Process Street and also be there for your team when they have questions. Finally, you need all four hats in a Process Street implementation to be successful. You need your process expert, the process documenter, the process builder, and then your Process Street lead at your company. And really, if I could best sum it up, Process Street's critical for all companies who want to grow and scale. But make sure that you have, as I said, the right team in place to implement. So in closing, if you have any questions or maybe some use cases on the top of your mind that you're wondering if Process Street would be great for, go ahead and drop those into the comments and we'll reply with our thoughts. And if we think Process Street's a good fit or not, don't worry, we'll shoot you straight. And if you like this type of content around Process Street, we're going to be doing more shorter form Process Street videos around building and configuring, and also some of the best practices that we've picked up in working with our clients over the years. So be sure to subscribe for following video content from that. But with that being said, we'll thank you for your time today, and we hope this was helpful, and we'll see you on the next video.